Miari is the name people use to refer to an area just to the northeast of central Seoul. Though it's not a neighborhood itself, it encompasses parts of multiple neighborhoods, including its namesake, Myeodong. If you had visited there during the Joseon dynasty, you would have found wooded hills, rural farms, and scattered residences. At that time, this was the gateway between Seoul and the northeast. But events in the 20th century would cause the name Miari to be associated first with death and then with poverty, prostitution, and sorrow. Now today, those associations are receding further and further into the past as the entire area is transformed by redevelopment projects, and the people who lived or were somehow touched by those 20th century experiences fade away. Hello there. It is a sunny Monday morning, nice, cool autumn day here in Seoul, and I am at Mia intersection. Sagori is a four-way intersection, and you'll often see it translated on signage as junction, usually abbreviated as JCT. You can see there's quite a lot going on here at this intersection because there is construction on the Dongbuksan. Right here, Dongbuksan. This is a new light rail transit line that's being added to the subway network. This road right here, heading north, this is called Dobongno. It's named for Dobong Mountain, Dobong District. And if you go in this direction to the southwest, that is Dongsomunro. Dongsomun means east small gate. That's the colloquial name for a minor gate in the city wall called Haehwamun. It's just north of Dongdaemun, the great east gate. And this route along modern day Dobongno and Dongsomunro there, this was for centuries a major pathway into Seoul. If you were coming from or going to the northeast, this was the way you came. And I say Seoul, but during the Joseon dynasty, it was Hansong. Travelers followed this route day to day. Invading armies used it. In the early 17th century, the Manchus invaded twice in an effort, a successful effort, to break the Joseon dynasty's ties with the Ming dynasty. They followed this route when they invaded the city. And in the Korean War, the opening days of the Korean War, the North Korean army came down this way. The route leads up toward Uijeongbu, and there's an area up there that we call today in English the Uijeongbu corridor, where some roads converge at Uijeongbu. If you were coming from the northeast, then you would come through Uijeongbu and on down past Dobongsan and where modern day Dobongsan Station is, and then follow the route on into the city. So Mia Sagori back here was kind of a major gateway into the city, and there were some taverns and inns that popped up around it where travelers could stay. It's just a few kilometers outside the old city walls. From what I've read, this area was known for its pine groves. And there are some hills around us. You can't really see them because of all the buildings, but the hills were covered in pine trees. We are just outside Lotte department store, just a little to the north of Mia Sagori Station. And a little further north, there is another intersection. And somewhere off in that direction right there is, somewhere over there in that area up on the hill, there is a temple. It's said that there has been a temple on that site since the 7th century, the late Shilla dynasty. And the original temple was called Mitasa. Mita means Buddha of the infinite light. But in 1394, just a couple of years after the Joseon dynasty was founded, a Buddhist monk called Muhak, he was an advisor to the first Joseon king, and he's the guy who's credited with selecting the site of the capital. He came out here and had the temple rebuilt, and he gave it a new name, Miyasa. And this is a name that I guess translates as broad, hilly area, broad hill area, broad area of hills. Mi means broad or expansive, and is a slope or a hill. So Mia is an area, a broad area of hills.
At least that's one translation. It appears there's some dispute here because mi can have multiple possible meanings. As for Miari, I thought this was going to be a clear-cut origin story of a village named for a nearby temple. But that's actually disputed, and alternatives have been put forward. One researcher who lives in present-day Myeongdong and has spent years digging into the name argues that Miari used to refer to an area further north along Dobongno, around what is now Changidong at the base of Choansan.
So I don't know how far back the name Miari goes, but it persists into the present, much like the names of a few other villages and hamlets that were swallowed by the city limits as Seoul expanded. Like, for example, just up to the north of us here, you have Suyuri. You can still see that name in use in some places. And off further to the northeast, there's Mangudong. People still refer to that area as Manguri. And people still refer to this area as Miari. So that is the background. Throughout the duration of the Joseon dynasty, the area of Miari was known as a waypoint for travelers and for its lush pine groves, its greenery. But in the 20th century, that all began to change very rapidly. All right, we are coming up here on Girum Station, and just beyond Girum Station, you see these tower apartments here. There's a bus stop just up the street over there called Girum Newtown. Girum Newtown was one of the original 3 pilot Newtown projects that were designated in 2003. The other 2 were Umpyeong Newtown and Wangshini Newtown. There were something like 9 zones in the Girum project originally. And some of them have been developed, some of them have not. I have not dug into it. I don't know all of the details. That's only interesting because of where these buildings are located. We are going uphill here. Maybe you can see it more clearly looking down in this direction. But this hill off over in this direction and all around us here, this would have been from 1912, the Mia Cemetery.
I don't know what the full extent of Mia Cemetery actually was, but based on what I've read, there's no doubt in my mind that it covered much of the area of what is today Girumdong. And that means that many of the apartments that were built as part of the Girum Newtown project are standing where those graves once stood. It's said that there were 16,000 graves in the cemetery by the 1930s. And when the relocations began in the 1950s, it had some 30,000 graves.
From what I understand, there were actually 2 hills that were used for the cemetery. This one and one not far away, just across the Dobongno there. I found a paper. It's related to the cemetery. It was published earlier this year by a professor from Sogang University named Lee Hae Yeon. And he grew up around here. Best as I can tell, in the late 50s or in the 60s. He doesn't specify. But he says here, during my childhood, I lived in Miari, a district in northern Seoul that was known at that time as a shantytown. What left the deepest impression were the meticulously arranged tombstones, sculpted by local stonemasons, silent reminders that this area had once served as a cemetery. As children, we built secret hideouts in the nearby hills, creeks, and abandoned houses that surrounded Miari. The hills were scattered with graves, some marked by small tombstones, others by barely visible mounds. We often encountered skulls and bones, using them unthinkingly as props in our games of war and adventure. That seems pretty grotesque, yeah, playing with bones as kids. If I had encountered human bones as a child, I would have run screaming, I'm sure. So because of this cemetery, Miari became associated with death, and you didn't have a lot of people living out here once that was established. I've read that there were 100 residences around the area after the cemetery was established, but they were primarily occupied by guards, people who were assigned with guarding and protecting the cemetery.
In the years after the Korean War, the government needed to do something about the people who were being displaced by the rebuilding of Seoul. So they designated some relocation settlement areas well outside of the city center. Miari was one of them. And in this 1962 photo, you can see in the foreground some Miari public housing. Notice that it looks all nice and neat and in a straight line. But in the background, you can see this mass, this disorganized cluster going up the hillside there. That is a Daldongne, a moon village, so called because being on the hillside like it is, the people there are closer to the moon.
Prostitution started to become a thing here, but it actually persisted for quite a long time. What you're looking at across the street over there are the remnants of what once was the largest red light district in Seoul. At some point, eventually, the red light district picked up the name Miari, Texas, presumably from the US military personnel who used to pass through here. It was also sometimes called Miari Hill, and we'll come back to that name. But by the time I got here in the 1990s, foreigners weren't welcome in areas like this. Foreigners in general, but US military personnel in particular. Anti-Americanism at that time was quite high. So if you came out to an area like this as a foreigner, as anybody who would be perceived as American particularly, you were setting yourself up for potential confrontation. So this was an area where you didn't see a lot of foreigners in the 90s.
Lee Hae Yeon has something to say about this in his paper. He writes, Just beyond the creek and adjacent to the public cemetery stood Miari, Texas, a red light district. Even as children, we wandered through its streets, occasionally receiving candy from women dressed in traditional hanbok. The irony was not lost on us. A place of death had become a site of commercial sex, and the sacred had become intermingled with the profane. By the early 1960s, major infrastructural changes, including the construction of bridges and roads and the concreting over of local creeks, led to the entombment of streams like Jongneungcheon and Wolgokcheon beneath massive slabs of concrete. As public cemeteries vanished and residential development expanded, Miari, Texas, began to grow. By the mid-1980s, following the 1985 opening of the Seoul subway system and a wave of Japanese tourists arriving for the 1988 Seoul Olympics, Miari's public image underwent a dramatic transformation from a cemetery zone to one of Seoul's most prominent brothel districts.
So in a few decades before the Korean War, Miari becomes associated with death because of the cemetery. In the immediate aftermath of the Korean War, it becomes associated with poverty and prostitution. In 1961, they made prostitution illegal, and some areas where prostitution had sprung up across the city were shut down. But this and a few other areas were allowed to persist, and it probably comes down to economic reasons.
In 1997, the National Assembly passed the Youth Protection Act, granting local governments the authority to declare certain areas off-limits to minors. In 1999, Songbuk District took advantage of that law to pass an ordinance requiring that signs be posted outside the entrances to Miari, Texas, declaring that minors were prohibited from entering. In the early 2000s, local police began a crackdown on underage prostitution in the area, and then, out of concern for underage prostitution and human trafficking nationally, the National Assembly in 2004 passed a new anti-prostitution law that resulted in stricter enforcement than had previously been seen. Gradually, the major red light districts around the city were shut down and redeveloped. Miari was the last one standing, and now its days are done.
There's one more association with Miari that I want to talk about, and that's the one that brought me out here for this video. It's an incident that happened during the Korean War, about which there is a song. June 25th, 1950, North Korea launches a surprise attack on South Korea. Their primary objective in this early part of the invasion is the capital, Seoul. Some of their forces follow what we call today the Munsan Corridor in the west. The eastern advance, it just pushes right on through. The defenses collapse. They capture Uijeongbu and they follow the Uijeongbu Corridor. Some of them come down this road, some of the North Korean units. There's a fight around Miari as the defenders try to slow the advance. And then we get here to the Giram Bridge. Now this thing above us here, this is not a bridge. This is the inner beltway, the expressway that I talked about in a recent video. The bridge in question, the modern version of it anyway, is right here. This is Giram Bridge. Today it crosses a street called Jongneung-ro. Jongneung is a royal tomb off to the west of us. But beneath Jongneung-ro here, Jongneung Street, is Jongneungcheon, Jongneung Stream. So if you can imagine a narrower road and a narrower bridge, this was one of the last obstacles coming into the city. The Miari defensive line was the final defensive line. Once they got past this point, they had a clear shot into the city. So the North Koreans cross the bridge. I believe it's on the morning of June 28th. And they make their way through here and on to Seoul, where they capture the city. They hold it for around 3 months before MacArthur makes his Incheon landing and pushes up to Seoul to liberate the capital and push the North Koreans out. I don't know if you can see it, but the street here slopes up, and there's a little rise just below that bridge up there where you start to go down the other side. It's really difficult to imagine what it would have looked like, but this was a pass through the hills here. We've got a hill over there on that side. We've got a hill here on this side, and this would have been the low point between them, a saddle. Today, we call it Miari Goge.
You'll often see it translated as Miari Hill. Apparently, that's what US soldiers started calling it back during the Korean War, and the name just stuck. It also ended up as one of the names for Miari's red light district because of its proximity to this spot. I've sometimes seen it translated as Miari Ridge, but I don't think that's really all that accurate. If we want to be accurate about it, Goge is a native Korean word that means pass, the lowest passable point between two hills or two mountains. So this is Miari Pass. Maybe this old map will give a better sense of what this was like. On the left side here, you can see Haehwamun, and the road progresses eastward from there across what I presume is the Songbukjeon. Just east of that, you see this gap between some hills. That is what we call today Miari Goge.
There was some construction done here in the 1960s, and I'll get down there and show you that shortly. But for now, we're gonna head right over here. There's something I want you to see. This is a monument to an event that happened as the North Korean soldiers were leaving Seoul, and it's immortalized in these song lyrics here. These are the lyrics of a song, and the title of the song is Danjangye Miari Goge. I've seen this title translated most commonly as Heartbreaking Miari Hill or Heartbreaking Miari Pass. Danjang, I think, is not best served by calling it heartbreak. It's a lot stronger than that. And I think in this context, Danjangye Miari Goge, I think a better translation would be the gut-wrenching sorrow of Miari Pass. The word Danjang comes from an old 4th century Chinese anecdote.
It's about a mother gibbon and her baby. A gibbon is a kind of tailless ape found today in Southeast Asia, but apparently no longer in the Three Gorges area of China where this little tale takes place. It goes like this. As an army was passing through the Three Gorges, one of the soldiers captured a baby gibbon. Distraught, its mother ran along the riverbank, wailing and following the boats for over 100 li, or about 50 kilometers, before finally leaping aboard one of the boats to die at the soldier's feet. When they opened her up, they found that her intestines were broken inch by inch. And that is Danjang. It literally means broken intestines.
Gut-wrenching sorrow, agonizing sorrow. Your intestines are broken. As the North Koreans retreated from Seoul, they carried with them a number of South Korean abductees. Now, they abducted people throughout the war, And this song immortalizes that by focusing on that day, the day they came through Miari Goge. The story is that people gathered on the hills on either side of the pass and watched their loved ones being carried away. Just listen to these lyrics here. Miari, the hill of tears, the farewell pass my beloved crossed.
When gun smoke veiled the way and I stumbled, unable to open my eyes, you, with both hands tightly bound in wire, kept looking back and looking back again. Barefoot, limping, you were dragged away over this pass. Oh, Miari Pass, laden with bitter Han. My dear, where are you now? And what are you doing? Little Yonggu spent tonight missing his father and has only just fallen asleep. On those long nights in the dead of winter, when the north wind and bitter snow rage, how hard must life be for you there in prison? Even if 10 years pass, even if 100 years pass, please just come back alive, my dear. Missing his daddy, the little one drifts to sleep. In the dead of winter, on those long nights when the north wind and bitter snow lash, how much you must be suffering in prison. Even if 10 years pass, even if 100, just come back alive. Oh, this pass we crossed in tears. Miari Pass, heavy with Han. Miari Pass, heavy with Han.
Han is a concept. It's been explained to me in different ways at different times. I think a potentially decent explanation of it is that it's a kind of unresolved sorrow, lingering sorrow, and it's mixed up with resentment and longing, a deep sense of injustice. It makes a lot of appearances in poetry and songs, in television, movies. So a place or an event is sometimes said to be laden with Han or heavy with Han. The song was recorded shortly after the Korean War, and you can find a version of it. I don't know if this is the original, but you can find a version of it from that era on YouTube. I'll put a link down in the description. And the last stop on our walk today is this little section of road up here. This is from the project that expanded the roadway here between 1963 and 1966. It opened in, I believe it was October of 1966. And just up the way here, we've got the blind fortune teller village. There are only a handful of blind fortune tellers here now, but apparently this area had a lot more, not just blind fortune tellers, but shamans and fortune tellers in general. You can imagine there would have been several of them here, and I get the sense that they would have been all over the area. And that comes from another line in the paper by Lee Hae Yeon. I vividly remember crossing Miari Hill in the back of a moving truck, passing rows of shamanic and fortune-telling houses decorated with colorful flags. And by Miari Hill, I'm pretty sure he means Miari Pass.
No one alive today can know what it was like to see the pine groves on the hills around Miari. And I have to wonder, did people then really think of them as something lovely to see? Did tired travelers sigh with relief when they saw they were nearing the taverns and inns at the intersection? We'll never know. But we can expect that for the people of that time, Miari did not represent death or poverty or sorrow. Its name was not a synonym for a notorious red light district. Miari has meant different things to different generations. For Koreans my age and younger, the shantytown and the cemetery are just stories that they may not have even heard. For them, it's been all about the red lights and the lower property values. And now Miari, Texas is on the path to demolition. There are multiple redevelopment zones in various stages of progress, and with that, even Miari's reputation as one of Seoul's poorer areas is on its last legs. It won't be much longer before the tears of Miari have dried, and it will mean something completely different to the next generation.